Hello, I'm Kimberly HayDay.
And I'm Amanda Day.
You're listening to the Fundraising HayDay Podcast,
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
And how we can all, and I mean all, do a better job. And by better, I mean a civil, non-world-ending job of changing the world through philanthropy.
Absolutely. A big shout out to our Patreon subscribers who help make this podcast possible. If you want to join this amazing community, visit our website at Patreon, which is patreon.com/fundraising HayDay. You can get monthly playlists, a book club where we are meeting in person over Zoom once a quarter, a wide open mistakes were made episodes, monthly musings by Kimberly, all the things.
Well, I don't know about the ranty monthly musings, but listen, we are laying it down on mistakes were made because we're making mistakes. We still are making mistakes, and we're going to tell you about them because that's how we all learn.
Absolutely. So hope you join us there. If you are looking for some affordable training in either grant writing or grant management that you can participate in at your own schedule, we have got you covered. We have a lineup of on-demand offerings that include a series of audio courses that are about 20 to 30 minutes each. You can get one episode for $19.99, or you can save a few bucks and get the entire lineup, which is 12 episodes per series, for $197.
What a deal.
It is.
But seriously, it is the deal. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you have been listening for a while, welcome back. We teach the same way we podcast, only there are not as many cheesy sound effects, and I tend not to cuss at all because I'm a professional. But if you are purchasing, whether it's one module or the whole shoot match for grant writing or grant management, you are able to listen at your leisure and re-listen once you get your selections in and set up an account for a whole year, right? And the reason why we're saying a year is because things are changing. And so in good conscience, we can't say it's evergreen content. Nothing will ever change about grants and grant management. No. We want to keep it real and keep it current for you. And you can check out the entire lineup. Tons of stuff on our website at haydayservices.com. That's HAYDAY services.com/shop.
There you go. In today's episode of the podcast, we are talking about the ins and outs of successfully navigating your job as a grant professional when you are employed at an organization. So Stay tuned. Y'all, we are so very excited to introduce our listeners to the first Season 9 sponsor of the Fundraising HayDay podcast. Grant Guru is the world's largest aggregator of grants and funding, and this incredible prospect research tool has made its way all the way from Australia to the United States. It's a searchable database that is updated daily, and it is so user-friendly. We're joined today by Adrian Spencer, co-founder and director of Grant Guru, to learn more about this incredible product with a mini-series during the first 12 episodes of this season.
Okay, so Adrian, with this segment, we're getting into my favorite feature, hands down. All the other things that we've talked about and the things that we'll be talking about in the future with Grant Guru, that amazing product. But here's the thing that blew my mind is that as you started in Australia, you have a pay model where you're working with, or have worked and continue to work with, local governments where they are sort of paying for the licensing and use of the product while extending rights to use to their constituents, mainly nonprofits and other organizations. That is something that we had never heard of here, and it just blew my little mind. So I know you're bringing this option and have brought this option to the United States. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how it works and what the benefits are? And I'll stop waving my hands around and let you talk.
Yeah, Kimberly, that's right on. this is a great idea, and honestly, we didn't think of it. But local government approached us and they said, sometimes we feel like we're so busy finding and applying for grants, supporting our communities and responding to the requests for help. They said it feels like we're on the hamster wheel of death. It's never ending and it's exhausting. But they said, what if we paid you, us, Grant Guru, to white label our product, put it on their website, and then it would be free for the non-profits and the for-profit businesses to access it. So we did that. That's become hugely popular. In Australia, over 50% of all local government have that product, and 2/3 of all Australians have access to that. We're just starting to roll that out across America now. So any local government or economic development agency can approach us to discuss that option. We even include the funding that they want to find and apply for. And some non-profit and community groups even lobby their local government to request this. Our aim is to get the information out there. We really want to democratise access to funding. We want it to go to the right place so the right people are getting the right funding for the right projects. That's our heart and our desire.
That is wonderful.
It really is. As someone who used to work in local government, I can attest that I would get phone calls from nonprofits all the time because they'd see my name and my title, grants administrator, and they thought my job was to help all the nonprofits in the community. And I wish I could, but I was so busy helping the city that I didn't have time to do that. So if I had that feature to be able to go, hey, let me let you into this little secret, log in, and you can do all your own research at our cost. I think that's amazing.
That would be a wonderful benefit. Also, I see an incredible merch opportunity for you with Get Off the Hamster Wheel of Death. I think I would buy that t-shirt. I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Find out more about this fantastic new resource for grant seekers. Visit grantguru.com/US. You get access to a user-friendly search engine, email alerts, grants calendar, customizable grant reports, and so much more.
And as an added bonus, Grant Guru is providing our listeners with 20% off their subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, use the discount code HayDay963. That's HayDay 963.
So, Amanda, as you so well know, we both started out as employees, full-time employees at either local government or nonprofit. For reference, for our listeners, I worked at the Children's Hospital, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I'm like, at major pediatric hospital in Atlanta. Hi, hello, there's one. It's Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I was there for 10 years. I was at the Atlanta Community Food Bank for a little over 7 years. And I ended my time as an employee before starting my business in 2018. I ended my employee experience at the Fraser Center, which is another nonprofit that includes learning and inclusive early childhood education, and then learning and work opportunities for adults of all abilities. So, Amanda, you were 3 years
Yes.
in a smaller city outside the metro area, and then more than a dozen at I would say a larger in terms of tax base, like a really growing city.
Population. Yeah.
Yeah, everything north of the city. So you were south of this metro Atlanta and north of the city. And if you're not from Atlanta's a big old sprawling thing. And depending on how you cut the numbers, it's 6 million plus residents. I think it's actually more than that if you count it. It's a big old 5+ big counties and outlying counties. So we have varied experiences between us as employees in either medium to large nonprofits and medium to large cities.
Absolutely. So we both have experience working as grant professional or development director in varying organizations, as Kimberly said, and we've seen a lot and learned a lot. And for those who are not watching on YouTube, you can tell Kimberly, as she always introduces herself, is a recovering development director. So it was a lot, right? But we've seen a lot. We've learned a lot over the years, and between our own experiences plus over the years, all the people we have talked to and heard from through the trainings we've done, people who've responded, emailed us, those kinds of things, we know that there are certainly pros and cons to working as a full-time employee, just like there are pros and cons to being consultants. And so the purpose of today's episode is just to share some pointers and tips and tricks and things to think about to hopefully make your experience as an employee more of a pro than a con. So that's where we're coming from today.
Or if it's a big old bunch of cons, to give you some ideas of what you can do in your next job or your next step in your journey, right? So there's always that touchy question of roles and responsibilities, because for a lot of us who got our start in grants, we were labeled grant writing. Often that was in our job title. Mm-hmm. And it's a misnomer because so much of grant writing has nothing to do with writing at all. Yeah. And even less so if you're moving into areas of grant management. So if you are new to this or considering a change or looking at this, there's sort of, I would say there are like 6 or 7 main categories of the type of work you'll be doing, right? So, and Amanda, jump in if I've missed one. So prospect researching, which is a fancy way of saying looking for grants. Okay, you're looking for grants, and you better be looking more than once a year, and you better be making some lists and being discerning, because not every open grant cycle is right for every nonprofit or local government. There's the actual writing, where you need to understand what's going on, in different programs, different strategic priorities. You'll need to be able to describe those. And sometimes not great detail, but very specific detail, compelling detail in certain formats, in certain words or character counts, right? Then if you get the grant, you got to manage the grant. So when you're thinking about what your own roles and responsibilities are, whether you're new to this or moving into a new position, these roles, these things need to happen in a grants system. Maybe you're not doing all of them, but they must be done. And if you're not aware of this, and if your employer isn't aware of this, you could be the grant writer who does all these things. So we already talked about prospect research, finding the grants, writing the grants, which is a whole nother thing, grant management, because if you don't spend the money and report on the outcomes, it's harder to get grants. So even if you're like, I'm not a grant manager, I'm not an accountant, that is fine, Brenda. You don't have to be an accountant, but those roles and responsibilities do need to occur. And for me, as I moved forward in my career as an employee versus as a consultant or a business owner, I moved into fundraising, because to me, they're all interrelated. The relationship building, the fact finding, the messaging, the reporting, which may be called cultivating in the fundraising world. It's all related. And then I think, Amanda, you've had experience in this too, the dreaded other duties as assigned, which can just, it can include all kinds of things. I think, Amanda, you wrote speeches, you wrote some newsletters for a mayor or two.
Yes.
All the things. As a development director, I was actually over at at the Fraser Center. I was actually over venue rental, which was not a great fit for me, although it's a beautiful venue and they have beautiful events. I'm just not that person. Yeah. And these are things you learn. And I wasn't aware that I was going to be necessarily that person. But so when you're thinking about this, in terms of roles and responsibilities, that's an exhaustive list. And if you are working at a medium, and if they're only doing 2 grants a year, okay. But I don't know of any small to medium size or larger nonprofit where they're like, we just write 2 grants a year and we get all our funding. So just kick back and manage a wedding venue. It's all good. Just write some speeches. It's all good. We have always preached that grant writing is not a solo sport. It is a team sport. And it's important to understand, even if you are the only person with the word grant in your title, you should not be the only person covering all of these bases that we've just talked about, and that they are many. So it's important to sort of think about that in the context of, as a full-time or part-time grant employee, looking across the organization and understanding that grant writing is the 20%, and you need to make sure that you're able to build a team to support you, even though you may not be managing employees yet, or you may not have a team of your own. You need to form your team and find those people and help educate them on the importance of this work. You shouldn't do it alone, but you should drive it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I think too, going back to your responsibilities, and these are all things to think about when you're applying for new jobs or when you're moving into positions. Because I think what usually happens at organizations that don't have grant professionals already on staff, either they decide we need it, so they create the position, or somebody on staff wrote one or two grants, was good at it, and they're like, hey, we want to move you into this new role and you're going to do grants all the time. And everybody's so focused on grant writing, nobody is thinking, oh, like Kimberly said, when you get it, somebody has to be managing it. And it doesn't have to be you as the grant professional, but typically what ends up happening is they're like, oh crap, that has to be done. Well, you're the grant writer, so you get to do all things grant related, right? And so suddenly you're doing that. So that's why we want you to think about all of,
Get through.
Ask these questions.
And what I found as I got more and more into grants, even starting at Children's at the pediatric hospital, is I was privileged to be able to learn all sorts of things about, the giraffe beds in the NICU that go up and down to move these tiny little babies so that they can receive better care. Research, and then later on the food bank. I learned so much about forklifts. I just can't even tell you. Refrigerated trucks, all the things. And you have to, it's almost like, even though grant writing itself may attract a lot of introverts, hello, hi, but you need to understand that you need to learn more, and people in your organization need to be open with their information, because the more you know, the more compelling grants you can write.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be in a situation at the large hospital where there were a couple of other grant writers on staff, and there was an entire foundation, not the grant making kind of foundation, but the kind of foundation that large nonprofits such as universities and hospitals often have, that they exist to raise money for that institution, right?
Yeah.
So there were plenty of places to gather information. There was a well-developed marketing department. But whether you're starting in a big organization or you are the executive director and chief bottle washer for your own nonprofit and you're just trying to get grants in the door, you still need to understand the funding priorities and have access to program information and also financial information. So I found it really important because I didn't have a financial background, to build that knowledge for myself, but also know I needed to really build some relationships with the financial folks who were managing that part of the grant management process, who were helping set those kinds of priorities. So even though I am an introvert, I'm really good at one-on-one and small groups, right? I love that. So lean into that and build those relationships. You don't have to meet everybody at a cocktail party and ask them what department they're in. That's also horrifying. But just building those kinds of things. So Amanda, what worked best for you?
I think I was fortunate. Both places I worked, I was the first I was the first one in that role both times. And so in both places I worked, I was able to report directly to the city manager, which would be like the executive director of a nonprofit. And both of them were kind of like, build it how you want it. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to create my grants teams. And I did at the bigger city. It was harder just because it was so much, like the first city I worked at, we had 5,000 residents. The city was 2 square miles. We had 4 departments: police, fire, engineering, it was really public works. And what was our other department? Maybe 911. I don't even remember. So I was mostly writing public safety and some infrastructure type grants. But then I moved to a much bigger city that was 26 square miles and 60,000 residents, and we had 11 departments. And suddenly I was writing grants for stormwater. And you talking about I learned all kinds of things about engineering, about technology, about Parks and Rec, just things that I never thought I would learn, right? And so thankfully at both places, they were like, what do you need? And they were very happy with my, hey, this is a team effort approach. And this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. This is what I need help with. And, finance was great about giving me people I needed to help with things. So I was very lucky. So, and I would say too, wherever you're working, another question, not only what are your jobs that you're doing, but also like, because where I worked, even though that bigger city was certainly bigger, I still wrote for every department, right? Versus like I would meet people that work for the city of Atlanta that they only wrote grants for the police department, or they only wrote grants maybe for the water department because
That
those
makes
it was
sense.
so big, right? So it is quite possible that you're not kind of a jack of all trades, you're more of a specialty. And so that's another question you want to ask too, like what am I writing for the entire organization? Or are there certain, departments, divisions, agencies, whatever?
And sort of red flag if no one can answer that question. Um,
Yeah.
wow, it's if you don't know where you're going, it will be kind of like getting in your car and pulling up, your Google Maps or your iPhone extravaganza moment for mapping and going sitting in the car and that little thing is blinking at the top and you're not saying what your destination is. It's going to be hard to get directions if you don't know where
Yeah.
you're going.
Very true.
So,
Speaking about knowing where you're going, I would
well,
argue that where you are situated in the org chart really can make or break how easy your job is and how much you like your job. Not even because like, oh, it's a power trip, you have to be here, but as Kimberly said, most of us, we are, some agencies may be so big that you do have a development team or a grant team, and there's several of you, and you're your own department. But a lot of us are there's only one or maybe two of us, and so therefore you're kind of shoved somewhere. And so that's a question. If I went back to being employed someplace, one of my questions would be, where am I sitting? Like, who am I reporting to? So, again, is it if it is a nonprofit, you may have a big development office. My question there would be, does your team understand how grants fit in? Because if you're the only grant person and there's 9 others that all do fundraising, more like the individual donors and major gifts and events, what they do, even though it's all fundraising, it's very different. And if they don't understand how grants work, there's probably going to be some frisson
there
between.
could be, or there just misunderstandings about
Yeah.
information sharing
Yes,
or setting budget goals for grant revenue, for example.
absolutely. Great example. Another place I found a lot of times grant folks get placed is in finance because, which it makes sense because it's like, well, you're bringing in money, it's money related, let's put you in finance. I get that. But here's why I personally think it's a problem. And I've talked to many grant professionals that are housed there and have heard their tales of woe. A lot of time, finance people are very focused on the money, and most finance people,
Rightfully so.
as they should be, yes. Most of them sit at their computer all day because they're dealing with numbers and Excel spreadsheets and those kinds of things. And as a grant professional, yes, there is plenty of time where you're sitting at your keyboard and you're writing and you're researching, you're doing things, but you also need to go out and about and meet with people and have conversations with folks and have meetings and do sorts of things. So it can be, sometimes they're like, wait, why is everybody else sitting at their desk all day? Where are you? Why aren't you here? And so that can be a problem and a bit of friction because of that. So that I just anything else you can think of with being in finance. Oh, I did have one more thing. It went away, but it came right back. Finance is their job is to make sure everybody is taking care of the money, which is their job, and they should be. And so they have all these policies and procedures in place, and they're making sure you follow procurement, and that when you're going into contracts are done the right way, and all that good stuff. They need to do that. But because of that, everybody else sometimes is like, oh, finance, they drive me crazy. They're making me follow those rules. And if you're in finance, oftentimes
Second
they're going to
only,
look at you as the same way, right?
second
And
only
that can
to
be hard.
HR. If you
Yes.
were I mean, in terms of people going, "Huh," and I say that as a former employee who was like, no, HR with all your rules, even though they were
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
were very
absolutely.
important.
I appreciated finance, but sometimes it was nice for me to be able to go, yeah, I get that that sucks, but we're following the rules, and here's why, and let me help you do this, and here's how we can do it together. So it was kind of like we can come together and we can fight the good fight, right? So that's another reason it can be hard to be in finance because a lot of times people just see you as like, oh, you're the stickler, and you're even though I was the grant manager, I was the stickler, and I was constantly telling people what they could and couldn't do.
But it's also, it can be setting up, there could be probably, and there probably are, silos between finance and program. And as grant
Yes.
writers, even if you don't write grants full time, you know this, you need program outcomes, goals, and objectives, and
Yes.
descriptions and need statements and all these kinds of things that do not come from finance. So sometimes that can be an artificial boundary. And just because we're talking about these areas, and if you happen to be in finance and you're like, my career is over, that's not what we're saying.
No,
we're like, let's be aware. We're just talking about, as an employee, how can you best navigate the grants world as a part or full-time employee?
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to point out. For some people, they may be in finance and it may work beautifully. And then there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying, if I am interviewing a place and they ask my opinion, I would say, do not put me in finance. But that doesn't mean it can't work for others. Sometimes they're just shoved in a random department because it's kind of like, we don't know where you belong, because, I've met people who have been in economic development, who have been in community development, who have they may have started out because they were already an employee, maybe an admin assistant at the police department. They started writing grants for the police and did well. And so they started writing grants for other departments, but they never moved them from the police department. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just a conversation of understanding, who are you writing grants for? If I sit here, is that my number one focus? And then if I have time, I can help others, or am I supposed to be helping the entire organization? So you just want to have those conversations. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you need to understand what works. Where my recommendation is when you are, no matter necessarily what department you're in, but that you are reporting directly to, say, an executive director, a city manager, superintendent of schools, someone who is at a higher level of leadership. Both times I worked, I was always in the admin department. And in that case, usually the approach of admin, which admin was like at the last city I worked for, it was kind of all of us random one-off folks. It was our special events person. It was our website manager. It was the assistant city manager and the city manager and an admin assistant. And so it was kind of the thought of, we're here to serve everybody. We help all of the staff, but we also help the community. That's why we're here. And so it was good for a couple of things, because one, okay, my job is to help everybody. So it was very clear that I wasn't picking one department over another. And even though, again, it's not like I had any more clout than anybody else, but people just had the attitude that, oh, you're an admin, you report to the city manager, that I must have some sort of authority and I just let them think that. And, because I was like, hey, if that means they're going to meet my deadlines and give me the info.
But you did. I just have to stop you there with love and respect. You were bringing in millions of dollars. Oh, yeah. I'm not saying, we do live in a capitalist society where cash, well, not even cash, Bitcoin is king or whatever. Money is king.
Yeah.
The energy of money. But also, that is a pivotal position. I just find it fascinating that there's so many, including me, who'll be like, oh, I'm just writing grants, or I'm just doing this or that. And it's true that it's in the nonprofit world, obviously you need to serve your community hand in hand according to what they're looking. But what drives that is you got to have money to do that.
Yeah.
Even if everybody in that organization is all volunteer. And it drives me crazy when it's bad enough, either as women or people of color, that we might get shunted to the side, even in the nonprofit world, sometimes by other women, who knows? But what we're doing is a really important function.
Yeah.
And it's highly skilled. Mm-hmm. And so you do need to have, and it took me a while to grow into that. It's like, oh, I'm just over here writing grants, funding the research and funding the things and funding the care and helping get the food out. And I'm not saying, oh, look at me, white savior for the world. I'm saying that it's an important function in local governments and nonprofits. And the authority is more like, you want money? Help me get you the money. Mm-hmm. This is how we get money from these particular people who have the money. I can navigate that for you, but we have to work together. And once that clicked in me, I was like, oh, and it did give me more confidence to do things like the ask for a seat at the table kind of thing. Because a lot of times, now in larger organizations where there are like multiple layers between you and the board of directors, that is what it is. But when it comes to things like even within your own department, setting budget goals, and by revenue goals, I mean like what's a reasonable financial goal for the grants team or the grants writer or the grants person or the development director who writes grants and as well as fundraising. Having, because of the kind of work that you do as a grant writer, you do have a lot of insider knowledge across a city or municipal government or a county government or a nonprofit that maybe even a program director may not have, and that a financial director may not have, because you're marrying the financial information with the program information and then other data to then put together compelling proposals, right?
Absolutely.
So it took me a while as an employee to learn how to navigate that. And I remember I felt so good at when I was at the food bank, my supervisor at the time, who was, I forget all the titles at the time. I'm going to say development director or development officer, right? And then there was a team and she looked at me one day, I'm sure when I was ranting about something, why we need to be doing this or that. And she's like, you really are a thought leader in this organization. And I was honored and humbled, but and then she went on to explain, because she did not say this. I'm saying this because I was up in all the business, because I needed to know how much things cost, how much people made, what are the funding priorities, and then what are these family foundations in the Atlanta area looking for, what nationally, and it can be, I don't mean it wasn't an ego trip, but it was like, you know what? I do have specialized knowledge and skills, and you do too, and you did too, Amanda. And so whether or not you have a seat at the board of directors table, that may or may not be possible, but certainly you have valuable information. And you're working with if you're working with major donor officers or fundraisers or special events coordinators, there's always a need for information and a sharing of stories and setting of priorities. And I would make the argument that at a small to medium-sized nonprofit that can field teams and departments, you really do need to be a part in some way of the strategic planning in some meaningful way as a grant professional, because you're bringing all that to the table.
Yeah. And if you're like, yeah, I understand that, but I'm having problems. We have a previous episode about educating up that may help you with some ways to get your
because I didn't just wake up one morning and people were like, oh, let us give you all the information. I had to negotiate with CFOs that didn't want me to have copies of audited financials, or HR people that were like, why do you need to know what someone's making? I'm like, because we're asking to fund their position. I am writing the grant. I worked with a client once where I had to take the budget back and forth with the ED because they didn't want the development director to know what people made. And I was functioning as the consultant. And I'm like, wow, that's not the way. That was convoluted. And it's also, you need to know if you're being asked to raise money for things,
you need to know what it costs. Yeah.
Straight up, because you're going to have to, and you need to understand, is that fair market value, especially if you're writing for state and federal, where you'll be asked to, well, actually anybody, you need to make sure that you're not way under or way above fair market value for salaries. You don't need to know how they divide their retirement and what charities they support out of their paycheck, but you need to know if you're writing for a teacher or a firefighter or a doctor or whomever, or a program director whose salary is going to be paid 50% from this grant, you need to know what that 50% is if you're writing the grant. Otherwise, that's just, that position needs to be in a place where that information is okay.
True story. So Kimberly touched on some of this, but I think it's important to set boundaries. And, again, these are conversations that's easier to have at the outset. But if you've been someplace 5 years and things aren't working, there's no time like the present to start saying, hey, we need to figure out some things to make life easier for folks, to make me more successful in my role so I can bring in more money. Kimberly mentioned this one already, but setting those realistic fundraising goals. Because I know, Kimberly, you worked someplace before where it was like every year they just kept going, okay, 10% more, 20% more, 10% more. And it's like, at some point you can't raise any more money, right?
It was 25% more every year.
Yeah.
And I was in this martyrdom phase. I was in my martyrdom era where I really took my self-worth from my ability to keep meeting ridiculous goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not advise that as a healthy way of life.
Nope.
And I would also respectfully point out that there are not a lot of businesses that are successful where they demand 25% growth every year, year over year for 5 years. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's unrealistic. And at the time, I was the only person writing grants. That changed.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back, and I later on, and there and in other places, I learned to go, okay, we can do this, but not that, but not this. This was a year where we got a grant that you can only apply for every 3 years. So I can't say I'm going to replace that $1 million grant that will be paid out over 3 years with another $1 million grant in the next year.
Yeah.
I can't, or, if you get what I'm trying to say, like, you can't promise that, but yet that was the expectation. And it was just like, especially right now in this economy, I don't know that you can say a whole lot about grants doing those, particularly federal grants. But anyway.
Absolutely. I think another thing, as the grant professional, you should have some say in what grants you do and don't pursue, that you should have some discretion on, like, hey, this isn't a good fit. Now, there has certainly been times where there's been a grant. I'm like, hey, we're not applying for it because we don't have a project that fits. And my boss says, well, actually, Senator so-and-so is on this committee and they want this project and they're going to push it through. Okay, fine. And I've written those grants, and then sometimes we've gotten them, and I never would have thought it if we didn't have that connection. Or maybe someone on your board knows somebody on a board. That's fine, but again, it's sharing that knowledge so you understand why you're doing that. But otherwise, you should have some discretion to be able to say, hey, why would I waste my time on this grant that is not a good fit when there's 5 others that are a much better fit and our likelihood of success is better. Hopefully you don't have a micromanager, that you get to determine how your time is spent. Because hopefully you're doing your job well and you know best on how much time you need to spend on research and writing and management if you're doing those 3 big bucket types of things. Hopefully you also have a say in how things are being tracked. Sometimes you come into a place and they already have software and you're just gonna have to learn it and figure it out and make it work the best. But if they don't have something and there's money to purchase something, if you're going to be the main user of it, hopefully you get a bigger say in, like, hey, this works versus this system. Other things too is having a say in maybe your ability to work from home or telecommute occasionally, especially if you don't, when I worked, I had a couple of times I had jobs where I had an actual office with a door. I almost never asked to work from home because if I was under deadline, I would just shut my door, put a note on there that basically was like, unless you're bleeding or dying, I'm under deadline, please don't interrupt me. And people respected that, right? But once I moved to a cubicle when we got a new building, I was just like, I'd sometimes tell my boss, I'm like, I need a solid 2 days of writing to get this done. And I can't have all this disruption. And he'd be like, fine, work from home, coffee shop, whatever you need. And so hopefully you've got some of that wiggle room, because it can be hard to, when you are in that 20% of my writing mode, to tune everything out. If you work in a place where there's lots of activity and people, even with my headphones on, which I like to work to music, there was constant activity going on, and that can be hard. And even with headphones on, people don't, when you're in a cube, they don't think twice about just being like, hey, Amanda. I'm like, there goes that train of thought, right? So,
that's true.
And then last thing, which Kimberly has already mentioned, but again, part of this is you need access to information, whether it is financial information, program metrics, and you also need access to subject matter experts that include both your colleagues and people out in the community. Otherwise, you're not going to get all the information, because no one person can know all of these things especially when you're writing for a plethora of different types of projects. By no means am I still an expert in public safety, in stormwater engineering, in traffic control. I mean, I know just enough to be able to pretend like I know something, but not enough. I couldn't have written 95% of the grants I wrote without having access to information and people with information. And sometimes that just meant me going and sitting in their office for 3 hours and picking their brain. And again, that goes back to having that wiggle room that you don't have to be chained to your desk, because sure, you've got email, sure, you can Zoom, but sometimes there is nothing beats, especially when you've got someone who's like I can't write a grant. I don't know what I'm doing. So it's just like, we're just having a conversation. Let's just chat about the project.
Yeah,
It
and they're
makes
not
people
writing the
much more
grant.
comfortable.
You're actually writing the grant. They're
Yeah.
just giving you information to write the
Yeah.
grant. It's all good.
So those are some things. And there may be other things. You figure out what it is that you need to be able to do your job successfully, and hopefully you get those things.
And like in all jobs, there are all kinds of metrics that are attached to this, right? There are
Yes.
ways to look at it. The most prevalent, the most important, and I mean, I guess rightfully so. If you're a grant writer and you need to bring in $1 million a year, or $10 million a year, or $50,000 a year, whatever you are, whatever you're doing, that's an important metric. I am a big believer in negotiating based on what's reasonable, what's in the hopper, how much of your time are you going to be able to write grants, or did they decide that you're writing and managing the grants, in which case, wow, hi, hello, the more successful I am at writing the grants in the future, the lesser time I'll have to actually look for grants because I'll be too busy managing the ones I have. Um, there's one that a lot of people toss around, a lot of grant writers, a lot of grant consultants and speakers or companies, and they're like, oh, we have our award percentage is 95%, which means that they get 95% of the grants they write. And I'm like, that is not the metric. I don't think it means what you think it means. I would not want to be held to that, because there are lots of ways to slice that revenue pie.
Yeah.
I want to be judged and evaluated, actually, on how much money I'm able to bring in given the goal that is reasonable. Because to get to that goal, I may be going after new funders, right? So maybe it's another way to calculate that is, as an employee, is to get to this $5 million goal or $500,000 goal or whatever it is you're doing. I have researched and found 15 new grants that our agency has never applied to before. And I would never want someone to be so caught up in, well, I need to keep my grant award percentage up, so I'm not going to go after new money. That's just a bullshit way of raising money. I mean, yes, it's easier to get money from people who are in organizations that already support your agency. Absolutely, 100%. But when it comes to grants, those same funders may not fund year after year, or your organization may have taken a program in a new direction that opens the door for more funding opportunities. Maybe you're moving from, maybe if you are a food bank, you're moving more into nutrition classes or school partnerships. That can open up a whole lot. There could be a library that's moving into more kinds of educational outreach, or helping people register for public benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Opens up a whole, if you have it's a public library with a library foundation, that can open up a whole lot more private funding. So another way to look at that is, did you meet your goal? Fine. Or did you come close reasonably? Great. But in terms of your win percentage, it's like, are you out trying to bring in new money? Or are you just right here, right into the same 4 or 5 agencies and hoping that they just keep funding you? Because I don't think that's a very healthy strategy. And I have seen and heard of people who do not want to take those risks. And if a grant consultant comes and tells you they have 100% award rate for every grant they write, they get, how many grants have they written, right?
Yeah.
If you're writing a bunch of grants, how many grants are you writing? And I don't get every grant I write. I never have, and I never will. And I will never say that. If you write to the same 5 family foundations every year, and you've gotten the same amount of money from those family foundations every year for the past 10 years, your organization is losing money. Because if you look at rate of inflation and cost of living, you're losing money. So I would tend to put that aside and focus on how much you were able to raise, how many new, if you're trying to expand your fundraising, which generally everyone is, how many new funders, how many new grantors could you bring to the table? If you're managing, grants, right? How many grant dollars are you managing a year? Because Amanda, you manage millions of dollars a year, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, a big chunk of my time was I was always proud that we didn't lose. Like part of my is like not only did we get the grant, but we didn't lose it, and we actually spent this much money, and we were able to implement these programs and projects and those kinds of things. So that's something since I did both, I wanted to make sure that I hammered that home.
Also, you need to look at grant research. How many, and I'm a big believer, like if I start working with a new client, I would want to do a once over, let's get everything on the table and look at it. But then
Yeah,
it's not a static document. It's not a
no.
static process. And as an employee, I would argue that even more so, you need to put part of your time to looking for these new opportunities.
Hmm.
Some of them are stretched. Some of them might be foundations that have family foundations that have been in business maybe for a couple of years now. There's a huge wealth transfer, right, from more of the boomer and the silent with the great, oh God, I forget all these names for all these
Before boomers, I
artists.
think it's the silent. Is it the silent generation or the greatest
Great
generation?
generation. I don't. Here's the thing. I also think they're
Yeah.
artificial marketing constructs to sell us things. So let me just say that.
Yes.
Let me say that. But there's a wealth transfer from older boomers to the oldest boomers are
Yes.
starting to turn 80, right? There's
Yeah.
an enormous wealth transfer that's going on, even in the midst of our incredible income inequality, but that can turn into, for certain areas, some more family foundations and donor advised funds in younger hands, if you will.
Hmm.
So to not be cognizant of that is to be missing some opportunities in your grant research. You
Yeah.
could also look at community partners. Are you doing any joint grant applications? What we're trying to do here is to give you ways to help people evaluate you,
Yeah.
to help people and help you think about the other value that you're bringing to the job. If you brought in $1 million and you identified $500,000 of new grant funding over the next 12 to 18 months, let's talk about that. Let's document
Yeah.
that. If you were able to get your organization written into as a subrecipient,
Yeah.
um, for a larger nonprofit or state or other agency where you're receiving funds, where the money comes in a different way, but you still played a part. Um, any of those things can help your employer understand the value of what you do, because most employers are not like, well, we want to keep the grant writers down. It's more like, here are the things that I'm bringing to the table.
Yeah.
So introvert, extrovert, ambivert, whatever kind of vert you are, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to prove what you're doing and don't wait for people to prove it for you. That being said, if you've built some great relationships with funders or colleagues, and they've written you things on LinkedIn, recommendations on LinkedIn, or they've sent you emails, save those
Mhm.
things and make it a part of your evaluation process. I just see it time and time again. Well, I just wrote this many grants and got this much money, which kept people employed and communities being transformed. But let's look more holistically about what grant writers, grant professionals can bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I would also say just a few things when it comes to communication. When it comes to communication with your funders, you don't want them having to talk to 12 different people depending on what they need. They need one key contact person, and it really should be you as the grant writer because you're going to know most of the things or at least be able to track down the information. So I highly recommend that you are that contact person. You want to make sure that you always are keeping your leadership and your supervisors abreast. I always let folks know. We did every once a month, I would send out an email with a list of these are the grants we've applied for, and then the kind of the yes or no or pending on that. Of course, anytime we got a grant award, I'd shoot out an email. And in that email, I would always give credit to whoever helped me with that. Because again, didn't have a grants team officially, but I had made up my grants team. So it was always like, couldn't have done it without this program person, this finance person, because I want them to keep helping me. And I want leadership to understand that I am not doing it alone because I can't do it alone. Another part of communication is if you are part of grant management is having that kickoff meeting when grants are awarded and making sure you're continuing that communication to make sure that grant is carried out correctly and you get all the way to close out. Because I always say it's great that you get a grant award, but if you lose that grant because you didn't manage it well, then who cares that you got it awarded? Because now not only is the money not there anymore, but you also have kind of a black mark on your agency of like, you may not get more funding from that agency. So can't
And
stress enough.
funders talk. Funders
Yes,
talk.
they absolutely do. But when you're the employee and you're the main grant person, communication is so vital to your role. So,
Um, I'd like to wrap up with something that's near and dear to my heart.
yeah.
Um, is we've met so many grant writers, grant professionals over the years, and one of the things they say is, "Oh my God, I'm so busy. I've got to get this. I can't convince my boss, the
Yeah.
leadership team, to hire more help. And what do I do?" And from my experience, and I think Amanda from yours too, it comes down to tracking your time. And you may think, but Kimberly, I am a salaried employee. I'm like, I feel you, salaried employee, but I was too. However, I walked into a situation where there were way too many fundraising special events for the popular. I walked into a situation where I was like, I need to change this. If you want me to raise more money, I can't be spending all my time putting together silent auction gift baskets and dealing with invitations. Not that events can be transformative, but when you're looking at a small team and maybe all your fundraising efforts are spread out all over the place, it's time to track your time and go and say, yeah, we can do 3 special events a year, but each special event for me alone is, I'm just going to make this up, is 500 hours. And that 500 hours not working on that special event, I could have written X number of grant proposals or sent in grant reports or made major donor calls, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The first step to that is being able to track your time.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of time tracking. Obviously, you always want to check with your IT department that you're not downloading some sort of thing you shouldn't be, or maybe you can do it on your phone. But there are plenty of places, plenty of free applications where you can just track your time. Yeah. Where you go in, like you come in and just pretend like you're a lawyer, just like Amanda Day Esquire. Get in there and from 8 to 10 in the morning, I did X, and track it so that you have data to go. Instead of, I just need help, it's like, here's what I'm spending my time on. Here's what you want me to raise. Let's solve for X. And sometimes the X can mean hiring additional people or making sure you have support throughout the organization to do your things. Or it could mean maybe hiring a consultant or someone part-time, PR, as needed, and seeing how that goes with very finite things. Or it could mean, if you are doing everything, it could mean I need to contract out event management. Or I need to contract out state and federal grant writing because of all these other things. But the best way to get there is to be able to prove how your time is spent, and that is tracking your time.
Well, and when I did that, because they, at first I was writing more grants, but as we were getting so many and I was spending more and more time managing, I was getting the question of, wait, you're not writing as many, you're not bringing in as much money. And so I showed them, I'm like, yes, because before I could spend 90% of my time writing, but now it's more like 60-40 or whatever it was. And I was like, can we hire a part-time person to help with either more writing or help take the management off and I do all the writing? And my boss was like, actually, we don't really have the budget for that. So he goes, how about we just lower our expectations of the grant awards you'll bring in, which is fair too, right? If they're okay with that, then, but at least it wasn't them having that expectation that's not doable. So,
and if you're working with someone who is unreasonable, what a reasonable approach. You approach them with, here's what I'm doing. And so here are the choices.
Yeah.
We can go more toward grants and hire a grant manager, or I can manage this and know that we can't raise this because I'm managing that. And he said, option B.
Yeah.
And if you're working in a place where someone tells you, well, you just have to do it all, and we're here because we have a passion for this work, and if you can't step up, then you're not a team player. No. Ladies and gentlemen, all people, it's time to update your resume. Okay? Because I have been in situations like that, and you do not need to feed into that we're a family, because there's all kinds of family, right? The Manson family was a family. I'm just going to leave that there for folks who know what that means. The Addams family is actually a really cool family, just a little different. But, there's all kinds of family. And your workplace is not your family, it's where you work.
Yeah. Well, and I found, I mean, even within the same organization, I found where it can start off and be fantastic, but then leadership changes and board changes, elected officials change, and it totally changes the feel and the structure and the expectation. And then it's not so great anymore. So, anyway, well, I feel like we covered a lot of ground in this episode. And like Kimberly said, one thing we always preach is that if you cannot change your situation for the better, life's too short to work at a place that is toxic and sets impossible standards. So there's nothing wrong with looking for a new job that appreciates the skills that you bring to the table, because as a grant professional, if you are a successful grant professional, you really are bringing a lot to the table. And so we want you to understand that and to recognize that. And we want everybody who's an employee within an organization to have the best experience and not get burnout after 18 months because expectations and realities just aren't meeting where they should be.
Which, by the way, is kind of the average turnover for a development director. Just saying.
It is. So anyway.
Thanks again to today's sponsor, Grant Guru. If you want to learn more about this incredible new tool to the grant prospect research market, visit grantguru.com/US. You'll find the link in our show notes.
And remember, they are providing a 20% off discount code on your subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, enter the code HayDay963. That's HayDay 963.
So I'm really glad, Amanda, that we could consolidate a lot of these things that we've talked about over the years into one place. And I'm hoping that if you're listening, and you've listened this far, you've found a couple of places that are thought-provoking for you, and others that might be a review, or others that didn't apply. But I think it's nice to have everything pulled together to kind of share that experience of what it's like to be an employee in grants in today's world.
Absolutely. So as always, we're honored that you joined us for our episodes. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks, where we're going to talk about the ethics, or maybe the unethics, is that a word, of commission-based fees for grant professionals. Talk to you then.
Spoiler alert, come at me. It's wrong.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.